Hey, Art Appreciation! For my investigative object, I've chosen the album art for Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. I've been a longtime fan of Pink Floyd, so when I joined the class and learned about the final project, I couldn't resist writing my presentation on one of my favorite albums. I've always had a strong connection to the content and have researched the meaning behind the artwork on numerous occasions, as well as that of my own interpretations of what the prism could represent in conjunction with the music. The album was released on March 1st, 1973, and the artwork was designed by Storm Thorgerson, a graphic designer who created album art for other artists such as Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. Thorgerson is known for his surreal and unorthodox work, all of which are unusual and hold a deeper meaning than what is presented on the surface. In his book, Mind Over Matter, The Images of Pink Floyd, Thorgerson stated that his work served to further enhance the sense of heightened perception, often called psychedelic or mind-expanding. The Dark Side of the Moon is without a doubt the most recognizable artwork Thorgerson has worked on. What started out as a rough sketch of a triangle turned into a 12 by 12 inch graphic of a prism, an image that came to represent Pink Floyd years after its debut. Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon is an iconic album as a whole, but the cover art sparked a revolutionary amount of intrigue and forever changed the band's image. Thorgerson opted for a more simplistic design. Against a velvety black backdrop, a bleak ray of light passes through a triangle and transforms into a color spectrum on the other side. At face value, the prism is a clever nod toward the mesmerizing light shows that accompany Pink Floyd's concerts. Yet the transformation that it encompasses suggests that a deeper layer of symbolism lies beneath the electric canopy of lasers and intense visuals. The prism that powerfully dominates the cover of The Dark Side of the Moon serves as an intrusive window into the mind and inspires a vast and limitless exploration of one's innermost self. Like he was for many other bands and artists of this era, Thorgerson was tasked with creating album art that reflected the dark side of the moon as a whole. His inspiration stemmed from the dark and emotional lyrics that Roger Waters, Pink Floyd's frontman, wrote for the album. In an interview with the Rolling Stone, Thorgerson stated that, with Dark Side, it was very much about the madness of the lyrics. These lyrics that Thorgerson was alluding to represented a window into the mind of Waters at the time, for he was struggling with depression, an illness that Waters had no control over. That lack of control is apparent in his song Brain Damage. Written in January 1973, Waters made blatant references to his depression in the song, as he lazily sings a repetitive, "The lunatic is in my head." Brain Damage also features a reference to the title of the album, as Waters sings, "I'll see you on the dark side of the moon," a depressing end to the song that I also took as an eerie lyric that foreshadowed his final breaking point. The juxtaposition between the deranged lyrics and the relatively uplifting music the band pulses through shows a real struggle to identify emotions and headspace. Thorgerson capitalized on this emotional confusion and descendance into madness and used the prism against the black background to represent it. The prism serves to physically illustrate Waters' struggles, but it also encourages the viewer to explore their own internal struggles and come out on the other side as a different version of themselves, as the color spectrum indicates. Waters' seemingly endless descent into madness and consequent self-exploration is also seen in the continuation of Brain Damage, as it bleeds into the next track titled Eclipse. With the same repetitive instrumentation and lyrical pattern, Waters ends on yet another definitive lyric, singing, "And everything under the sun is in tune, but the sun is eclipsed by the moon." This lyric alone solidifies the idea that the album art is representative of self-exploration, as Waters is demonstrating his ability to see the good and bad in himself in spite of the depressive lens he viewed the world through at the time. With the conclusion of the song and the album, Waters has completed his war with his innermost self, although that doesn't mean he came out better on the other side. As I stated before, the color spectrum is indicative of the change we go through during our self-exploration, and the change can be positive or negative, as long as something new comes out of it. Furthermore, the blackness of the background that almost envelops the entire cover also alludes to the limitless possibilities of what our minds hold, as well as how we'll come out at the end. The ambiguity that the blackness represents encourages us to dive in and explore our innermost selves. As can be seen by other successful artists and their work, Thorgerson is hardly the first artist to connect his work to human emotion and incite self-introspection through his images. In our textbook, we briefly studied Edvard Munch's Scream. The oil painting was completed by Munch in 1893 and depicts an image of a warped human figure screaming in terror. The harsh colors used create a feeling of uneasiness and add to the overall anxiety that the painting exudes. In an analysis paper written by Gary E. Friedlander, he stated that Edvard Munch frequently portrayed emotional reactions to his personal life experiences in his visual art. Friedlander's analysis shows that Munch's Scream was a direct reflection of the unresolved issues in his own life, much like Thorgerson's was a subtle nod toward Waters' depression and self-exploration. Another artwork that we studied in our text was Roberto Matta's oil painting titled Listen to Living. Completed in 1941, Listen to Living was a surrealist approach toward the inner workings and chaos of the mind, and evokes the same inner exploration that Thorgerson's album art does. The opposing colors, indiscernible shapes, and disorder of Matta's painting invoke the same disjointed thoughts and feelings within the viewer. Both of these works share the same elements that are central to Thorgerson's art. The light ray entering the prism and leaving as a color spectrum encompassed in a black background is akin to Matta's use of chaotic surrealism, and the connection between emotions and art is prevalent in both The Scream and The Dark Side of the Moon. In essence, the art that supplements The Dark Side of the Moon is so simple, yet is so heavy and complex in meaning. The prism and black background that Thorgerson chose submerges us into a mindset that incites the questioning of the stability of our innermost selves. We are encouraged to allow ourselves to be enveloped by the inky blackness that has already taken over the cover without really knowing what we'll find. Yet the prism and the color spectrum remind us that although the journey through our subconscious is riddled with more questions than answers, we will ultimately come out as something new entirely. Manipulating emotions and stimulating thought provocation is the ultimate use of art, and Thorgerson was successful in creating an artwork that incited both of these responses on a massive scale. Millions of copies of The Dark Side of the Moon have been sold worldwide, meaning that millions of fans were affected by Thorgerson's prism. The self-exploration that the prism represents is so powerful that although the album was released 45 years ago, its relevancy and overall meaning hasn't diminished and has even strengthened over time.